We'll begin with the extremely talented script consultant Jen Grisanti in conversation with Timm, the ISA's Director of Community Outreach and the silky-voiced host for the ISA's Curious About Screenwriting podcasts.
We'll just start with a very simple question. What can you do, you as a writer, filmmaker, etc., to set your story apart from the rest?
Okay, so it's fascinating being here. First of all, it's my first time at Sundance. So how many of you, is it your first time? Yeah, pretty fun, huh? We're having a great time. You know, the thing I look for in story, like we saw 2 films last night, and it was really fascinating to go, you know, my initial thing as a story analyst is I'm always looking for a strong trigger, dilemma, pursuit arc to open the story, and that arc sets up the emotion and it sets up the stakes. So that is definitely one very important thing that you can do that sets your story apart.
And we'll get into that. I know people are taking notes. We'll define what trigger, dilemma, pursuit means. So.
Yeah. So trigger. This is something like I've studied story for 25 years and 12 years as a studio executive, as Max so kindly put in my bio. So and I've evolved. Story is constantly evolving. Like I teach story based off of the brilliant writing that I see. That is how I teach story. I definitely am a Joseph Campbell person, Aristotle, I'm definitely into, but I'm also into the recognition that story is constantly evolving and changing as we are constantly evolving and changing. So my formula, trigger, dilemma, pursuit, was something that kind of came to me like 8 years ago when I wrote my book, Storyline, Finding Gold in Your Life Story. I recognized like what sets my voice apart. And I recognized at that point in my career, I had been analyzing story for 17 years. So I got a bunch of Oscar-nominated, Emmy-nominated scripts, and I extracted a formula. And that brought, because I thought I want to teach writers how to write a script that hits it out of the ballpark. And what I extracted was the recognition that all strong story begins with a strong trigger incident, like inciting incident as it's called by many other people, that pushes the central character into a dilemma. So the dilemma is, in your dilemma, you want neither choice is an easy choice. They're both difficult choices. So it's when your central character is caught between a rock and a hard place. And then the pursuit stems from the choice that is made. And then every story point, every obstacle, escalating obstacle, all is lost moment needs to connect back to that goal. And it's when the goal isn't clear that the story doesn't work.
And this can happen multiple times throughout the script. So it's not like trigger is first act, dilemma is second act.
Well, trigger is the first thing that starts every story arc.
Sure.
But you can see everything is triggered by things.
Right,
yes.
So you could even bring it down to a scene level.
Yes.
And say in the scene, here's
what
a trigger.
triggers this emotional response.
Right.
Yes.
So it's not just an overarching formula to place your story within. It's something that you're constantly breaking down into the every moment-to-moment basis.
Yeah, exactly.
But it helps then, I'm assuming, to have an overarching, as you're outlining the first stages of your project, you go, okay, just generally speaking, here's what I'm thinking, because sometimes when you're starting a script, you don't really know where you're going to go.
Yes.
So you go, okay, generally trigger, here's maybe a pursuit, and then here's maybe a dilemma, and then you're breaking it down.
Then you're breaking it down. But it is keeping in mind, like for the A story, the initial trigger that happens at the beginning of the story is what's driving the story. So it is the overall arching arc as you're talking about. So you really want to be, like, you want to know what does the central character want. That's probably another big thing that I ask myself. And if I don't know the answer to that in the first 15, 20 minutes of the story, then that creates a problem, because then the audience is looking for, what does this person want? What is their desire, and what's getting in the way?
And it sometimes helps when you're not necessarily telling the audience, either through dialogue or some form of action, that this character wants this. You're seeing the character within his or her own world, just living as she is, and the audience is going to start assuming things like, oh, this is who that character is, I'm assuming that this character wants this, because we're seeing her in these first 3 or 4 pages acting out in a certain way.
Right.
But then what I like to do, and I'm assuming there's a part of this in here, because I actually know there is because we've chatted about it already, but there's a difference between want and need, because that character thinks she wants something in the beginning. And really the whole story is about what she actually needs, and she didn't realize what she wanted.
Exactly.
And then all the trigger, dilemma, pursuit is kind of leading to that.
You're right.
So we can just end that now.
That has to do with the internal story, which I know we'll go through with some of the other questions. I think understanding the why of the storyteller, that they're wanting to tell this story, and understanding the why of the central character. So when you understand the why, then you understand what the story is about. You understand the internal struggle, which is key to the story working.
And that's how we then get to this next question of, because you saw some movies last night, and I think we're going to kind of connect all of this.
Yes.
And ironically, and maybe we don't need to name the films because one of them she didn't really love and the other one she did. What are some things a writer can do to make the audience really feel your story?
Yes.
Because there needs to be a personal connection there.
Yeah, if you go to my Facebook page, you'll see the one that I love. It was a fascinating thing in dissecting the stories after, which I really had a great time with Craig and Misha from ISA, and it was wonderful and Scott to be with people who share this massive passion for story. And one of the things that Craig and I had talked about was one of the films, it was almost like it breathed too much. Like it felt very slow. There wasn't a unifying thread that really drew it together, whereas the other story breathed perfectly, like between the humor and the drama. So it was really looking at the breadth of the story, and it was also understanding. We knew what the central character wanted. We understood the stakes. The momentum was there. The characters were so beautifully crafted and performed that it just, I walked out of that screening and I was like, this is why I love what I do. Like when you see people hit those pinnacles.
Yeah, and we as writers, we need to remember that we're also audience members. I mean, when we go to see a movie or we're just relaxing at home and watching something, we're wanting to be connecting to that story and character too. So that sometimes it's easy to, when you're writing, to disconnect yourself and think of yourself as only the writer. But if you're not feeling the story as you're writing either, then obviously it's not working.
Yeah, it's true. It's interesting. Something I wrote a blog for the Huffington Post on the films, and I want to read one little excerpt that really helps give you a sense of how we feel your story, and I based it on 5 of the Oscar-nominated films. I said, when we understand the truth that is being revealed and it connects something in us, it is fulfilling a void through finding a solution. If we know what the internal struggle is and the arc of healing the wound is explored well, we feel the conflict and triumph in the outcome. When we understand what the filmmaker is trying to say, we feel the story.
I think the key point there is healing the wound. And it may sound dramatic saying it that way, but even if you look at a movie like 40-Year-Old Virgin or something, some wacky comedy, there's still some form of a wound there that he is either just accepting, which kind of you see him at the beginning of that movie and he's just like, this is my life.
Yes.
Then his friends have decided, no, your life is no longer going to be that way.
Yes.
And so he's like a reluctant hero. But there is that wound in some way. And it's a good example of the difference between want and need in that movie, because he is setting out thinking he just wants to have sex when really he needs to fall in love.
Yes, exactly. And I think understanding that's, like The Revenant. How many people saw The Revenant? Yeah, so like when you look at The Revenant and you think going into that movie, my expectations, I had heard it was violent. I knew about one portion of the story that I was like, okay, I'm going to be interested to see what they do with this. And what was so brilliant, I think, about this film was they took a moment that happened before in the internal struggle, that happened off camera, and they connected it to a moment within the story arc, and it was all about the healing of the wound through the pursuit. And that's what pulled us in. Like, how many of us, God willing, we don't know what a grizzly attack is, but we do know what it is to come back from trauma and what it is to come back from loss. So the movie pulled us into that journey, and we identify with that pursuit because of our own recognition of the arc of healing from loss to redemption.
Yeah, and I'm just going to give a spoiler here. You guys should see The Revenant anyway because it's just so beautiful. But his son is murdered, and so it happens after the bear attack.
Yeah.
And so his need to then get back to his camp is, amplified because of that need for revenge. Imagine that movie if their friends had just left him because they couldn't, take him anymore, minus the son being murdered.
Exactly.
There wouldn't have been that need to do anything.
Yeah.
It wouldn't have been nearly as intense for him.
Yeah.
Because he still would have gone through the horrible awfulness that he went through.
Exactly.
Which still would have been amazing to watch.
Yeah.
But it wouldn't have had that feel.
It wouldn't. Yeah, I think the Revenant, like for me, I think the question being debated kind of was the idea of, will redemption heal the wound? Another thing, a simpler way to put wound, because a lot of people are like, how do I wrap my brain around that? A simpler way to look at it is at the beginning of the story, with the trigger incident or inciting incident, there is a void that happens on a personal level, and the pursuit is filling that void.
Yeah, it's interesting because we don't need to talk about The Revenant too much, but it's interesting that the bear attack happened prior to his son being murdered, because then it was just high. That's one thing you have to constantly do as a writer or a filmmaker, just make it as difficult as possible for the character to obtain whatever it is that character is trying to obtain.
Exactly.
So what were some of the other films that you were...
So some of the other films that I referenced in the blog were Room. How many people have seen Room? And the interesting thing for me about Room was the logline led me to believe that they were, and this doesn't give anything away because it's in the logline, but the logline led me to believe that getting out was the inciting incident. And yet that doesn't happen till halfway through the movie. And what made us feel the story, in my opinion, along with the writing and the directing, obviously, but it was the powerful performances by Bree and the son.
I can't remember.
I know, I forget. And so it was just a phenomenal look at, life before the trigger incident and how the boy saw the world through one room and his mother. And that was all he knew about the world. So through understanding the worldview of the central character in the situation and the worldview of the person writing it, and obviously the directing of it as well, I think it's the merging of those worldviews that really bring together masterpieces that make us feel. Other movies that I talked about was Inside Out, which was excellent, and I think a very important...
You need, it's just
amazing. Like, I have a family member who is young and going through a lot with the emotional growth that happens with the youth, and really having a story that really helps us know and understand our emotions in a way that you never imagined through the lead after the family moves is just brilliant, and we feel that, and the message is so clear, and we understand what the story is about. And then the final movie I talked about was Steve Jobs, because for me, and I saw Steve Jobs twice, and I have to tell you guys, like, seeing a movie twice makes such a big difference. I mean, you see things in the second time that just bring it together in such a way. And for me in this movie, it was the internal arc of the personal wound when we find out that Steve Jobs, when the boss says, why do adopted people always feel rejected instead of selected? And that really set up the tone for the arc with the daughter. And it was just, I thought it was incredible because I walked into that movie and I thought, I just want to walk out knowing who this mastermind is, who he was. Like, I just want to feel like I knew him and I understood what made him tick. And I thought through the internal story and how it made us feel the story, I understood him.
There's so much we could say about biopics, because that's a whole other conversation, because they're tricky. Walk the Line is a perfect example. Just as a quick aside, what Walk the Line did is not try to tell the story of Johnny Cash, but they told the story of his pursuing June Carter. And through that, we got to know Johnny Cash. Because you can't really just go, here's when Johnny Cash was born, and then here's some amazing things that's happened in his life, and then we'll follow him until he dies. It'd be a 12-hour movie. So you have to pick the moments that are most important to him that then can show who this character is. But then that is kind of related to, and Inside Out is an excellent example. Pixar always has an amazing knack at having almost two main characters. I shouldn't even say almost. There were two. It was Joy and the little girl.
Yeah.
And they do such an amazing job at making sure that we as the audience understand immediately who these characters are.
Yep.
And they're so precise in choosing the moments and the visuals and the lines of dialogue that define them, that we as an audience, we don't need to think about it anymore.
Yep.
Then we're just on for the ride.
Yeah.
Like if you could imagine any movie that you see without the first 5 minutes of it, you'll be lost. Yeah, or at least just disconnected, because you're not going to understand who the characters are. So how does this then relate to voice? Because it's important to do all the structural things and make sure things happen at the right time.
You know, voice is such a thing. Like as we were saying, if you ask 10 different people, you're going to get 10 different answers. I think my opinion of voice, like when I feel it, I know it. And that really has to do with digging deep into the core of the scene. Like there was a scene in one of the movies that I saw last night that I just loved, that went on so long, but it was seriously, it was brilliant. Like this scene was, you so understood what the writer was trying to say, what the character was trying to say, and the frustration and the expression of the world view was so clear. And I think, like, I saw the movie and loved the movie Spotlight. And in Spotlight, there was this scene, I'm sure many of you know what it is about, you know, the Catholic Church and molestation with the priests and kids. And there was a scene where one guy was talking about what happened to him. And he talked about having an ice cream cone, and then he went into all the other details. And then he said, I didn't even get to eat my ice cream cone. The ice cream just melted down my arm. And I was just like, oh my God, like loss of innocence. Like that hit me. I was just like, this is a voice. I completely understand what is trying to be said here, and I get it.
And there are kind of, it's like two ways to look at voice, because what Jen's referencing is voice, meaning something that's coming from the heart so that we as the audience can connect to it without really needing to break it down mentally or logistically in our head. It just connects.
Yes.
But then the other part of voice is when you're like, oh, that's a Judd Apatow movie.
Yeah.
Or that's a Steven Spielberg movie, because they just have established themselves in the way they create scenes and the way they deliver messages.
Like there's a writer friend of mine who was in television, and then she just wrote 2 big films. And what I said about her writing, and I said it to her on a panel, I said, what I love about your writing is that at least one time in almost everything you've ever written, I'm in tears. And her response was, I cry a lot. And I was like, I get it. Like that's your voice. You understand how to bring your audience to that place of emotion. And that's the key. That's what we remember. We remember how you make us feel. And I also think like how many of you would say you understand your own voice? have a clear sense of what your voice is. You're starting to. Like, you grow into it. Like, I always ask people, what is your voice? Your voice is really based on your deepest, darkest moments that have happened in your life. And
then your reference to worldview, too, because
Yes.
we all have our own worldview.
Yeah. And because, like, when our world turns upside down and the carpet feels like it's been pulled out from under us, that's when we have something to say. That's like the journey back to a life in balance is when it's during that journey that so much comes through us and we have something to say. So that's how you really get to know and understand your voice, and you transfer that to your characters through their emotional truth.
Yeah, and in an odd way, just because I am sometimes far too practical, and I break things down in a very organized way in my head and just thought process, and in no way am I saying I've completely understood who I am on a personal, spiritual level or anything like that. But as you go through that journey of just kind of figuring out who you are
Yes.
at a core level, you're then able to break yourself up and go, this is who I was 5 years ago, this is who I was 10 years ago, et cetera, et cetera. And each of those versions of yourself had a particular worldview and voice. And so as a writer, you can go, okay, this character might be myself 5 years ago, this may have been myself 10 years ago, and suddenly those different voices start to come out, and it's all still just a part of you.
Yep.
And it's, that's all voice.
It is.
If you can break it down.
It's coming into your own voice. Like, how many people in here have been head over heels in love? So you look at love, and you go...
A lot of people just roll their eyes.
Well, you look at love, because love it's an issue for all of us. Love and finding intimacy and staying with intimacy is an issue for all of us. But finding love and knowing and recognizing love is the same as finding your voice. And if you look at the way you saw love when, say, you were 10 years old, 20 years old, 30 years old, 40 years old, 50 years old, like, your view of love shifts. And that's because your experience of love and knowing and understanding, seeing and recognizing love shifts. And that's the same with your voice. And it's a constant growth that's going on.
It's kind of like, athletes kind of have an expiration date. Writers don't. We can be writing until we die. So
I have to admit, like, the age thing for me, I'm going to tell you, I think writers get stronger as they get older. And I am definitely a believer, like with the King's Speech, the 73-year-old writer. For me, that's what made that movie the masterpiece that it is.
Right.
Yep.
Okay. Now we'll get kind of practical here now. We're kind of getting, I love all that, and we can keep going. But because it is inspirational, because we all have that voice inside of us, we just have to practice the craft in order to let it out. But well, you worked as a studio executive for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll just kind of get some, we have about 25 minutes,
right.
So I want to hit all these things. But,
okay.
So when you were a studio exec, you were staffing shows, and we can kind of reference some logline issues here too, because I read probably 50 to 60 log lines a week or more. Executives probably read even more than that. And it is kind of that first impression.
Yes.
So what are some qualities that you look for in the writing itself, not just the logline, but when you were looking at samples, what were you looking for and hoping to see, etc.?
Every year I staffed up to 15 shows when I was an executive, and every staffing season you'd have like 300 scripts behind you. And so if you're lucky, you're able to read them all, but chances are you're going to read 200 of them, and you're going to go off of the way the agent sells the script, the manager sells the script, what the story is about. But the biggest thing that I would recognize was the use of theme, symbolism, and message. To me, that took the writing to a whole nother level.
So those three things again?
Theme, symbolism, and message. And it's almost like when you really look at the inside story and you're building an arc of growth. Like, for example, there was an episode of Mad Men where Don was having an affair with Miss Farrell, the teacher. And they're in bed and waking up, and Miss Farrell tells Dawn about this story about an 8-year-old boy coming up to her and saying, "How do I know you see blue like I see blue?" And this was the theme and the arc throughout the episode of theme, symbolism, and message, and seeing how the director took that and how it went juxtaposed against everything that went on within the story. Like, that will stay in my mind forever. And, you know, so I think that it's really understanding how to link and connect everything that is going on in your story. And it's the breadth underneath your story that makes the difference. And logline wise, a formula that I work with writers on is setup of who, create empathy, dilemma, action, goal, twist of irony.
You got that?
Yep. So setup of who, create empathy, dilemma, action, goal, twist of irony. And it sounds like a lot, but it's like when you can put that in a sentence, it will tell you whether your story will work or it won't work.
Think of it this way. It's kind of like taking a unique situation and placing a particular type of unique character within that situation. This is as you're brainstorming a logline, and then just seeing what can come out of it. Eventually you'll get to the point where you're then structuring that logline so it reads well and somebody reading it can get it quickly. But when you're brainstorming the logline, it's who's this character within a type of situation that will recur throughout a second act. Because if you don't have the type of moment recurring over and over and over again, the logline really won't be able to connect with the person reading it, because they won't know what is happening really.
Exactly. Like one key thing I look for in the logline is, does the end answer what's set up at the beginning of the logline? So it's kind of like, do I understand the journey? Is the goal linking back to the dilemma that is set up in the beginning?
Yeah, and like, if you guys ever had like some wild adventure that you're telling your buddies about when you're having drinks or something, like, remember that time this happened? It's probably because it was like, okay, I was in this situation, and then this situation happened, and it was crazy, and then this is how I dealt with it. That makes a basically good story.
Mm-hmm. That's true.
All right, so it's a tricky thing writing for TV.
Right.
Because when you're creating a series, like you're writing a pilot, the reference to what you were saying about Mad Men and how that thematic statement basically was said in bed, and it was the defining moment of this episode.
Yeah.
But there is still a connection to the overarching season theme, and then even above that, there's an overarching connection to the series. Because really, that statement is pretty much what Don Draper is saying to us. Like, you know, do you see the world the same way as I do? Probably not.
Right.
And so there's an overall connection constantly. So every episode needs to have different versions of that theme, and you should know what that is when you're creating your series.
Yeah, I think when you look at like your season arc versus your pilot arc, like you really are looking for, I mean, an excellent example of a strong season arc was Homeland. You know, you look at the season arc, and the question that comes out of the pilot is Brody the prisoner of war who turned or not? And every episode is going a step into answering that question.
Because that's the most important part about a pilot, because the audience members need to know, here's what we are going to be experiencing for the next 100 episodes maybe. And that's especially what a producer or TV executive wants to see. Can this last for 100 episodes? Okay, so let's talk just a little bit. Just give a background about Writers on the Verge, so everybody knows what that is, because there are a lot of writing fellowships out there that you guys should all be aware of. Yes. Writers on the Verge is one of them.
So I've been the writing instructor for Writers on the Verge for 8 years. It is a diversity program at NBC. We take submissions starting in May. So you can just Google Writers on the Verge at NBC and you'll get it. We get probably we've been averaging around 2,000 submissions. And then we have 8 readers who go through those submissions. And then my job is to teach the top 8 finalists. We go through a 12-week program. Karen Horn, I work with at NBC, who's the head of the whole diversity division and every component. and an amazing woman. And I think like our job is through this 12-week program to really take the writers through a boot camp that is, you know, quantifiably they're going to have a new spec and a new pilot at the end of the 12 weeks. So we go through that. We go through the whole writing process. Now, obviously, these are strong writers because they made it in there. But we're
thousands of submissions.
Yes.
I mean,
yeah, but we're learning, you know, you can have strong writers, but to have working writers, you have to take it to another level. So certainly the goal of the program is to help these writers take it to another level so that if they don't have representation, they get representation and obviously get staffed. That is always our goal. And I can say through my own experience, I mean, we've averaged probably 5 of the 8 writers a year getting staffed, and one year we had 7 writers. And the great thing about the program is these writers are, once they're staffed, are really having long careers because they're being trained on the basics from the start. So I do highly recommend the writing programs. However, one thing I do want to say is, and I have so many people who are like, oh my God, I didn't get in, I'm not good enough, blah, blah, blah. No. Like, I'm going to tell you, like, I work with a ton of writers, and I do a Storywise teleseminar that begins March 1st. That's everything I teach in Writers on the Verge and more. And I can tell you through my own program, and I've had like 108 people from all over the world in my teleseminar, I can tell you when I look at the level of writing that's there versus the level of writing of the 8 that we select, that there are similarities and parallels. And it doesn't mean that one is better than the other. It just means that it connected with the reader in a stronger way that brought them to be selected. So the writing programs are great training. They give you exposure. They give you opportunity. But you can get that all on your own as well. So I never want people to feel like if I don't get into a writing program, I can't make it, because that's not true.
No. Well, especially because I think there are maybe 7 or 8 major writing programs out there because of the studios.
Right.
Basically, every studio has one.
Yep.
Are the Writers on the Verge paid during their time? No, they're not.
No.
Unlike some, like
ABC is.
the ABC doesn't
Yes.
pay fellowship. It's like $30,000 or something.
Yeah.
Which
60,
they
actually.
expect you.
60.
Oh, is it 60?
Yeah, I think it's 60.
But I think they own the material afterwards.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's 60. Yeah.
And we could have a whole other conversation about contests. I'm going to get more into that and fellowships, but I'm going to get more into that during the panel at 12:30. But the benefits of the writing fellowships, I mean, like she was saying, it's one thing that you're getting an incredible education by being accepted into it, but it's also a calling card. You're going to find solid representation because of the fellowship, because you can say I was a writer on the Verge in 2015, and you're going to find a rep, and they're going to be sending you out. So even though that person may not have been staffed because of Writers on the Verge, they will eventually, or at least they're going to have samples that will come out. So there's so many, I mean, what other benefits are there from these writing fellowships?
I think the biggest benefit, like how I look at it, we create a community in the room. And the biggest benefit is, like, I feel like when I walk away from each group, if this group continues this community on throughout their careers, then there's something of tremendous value there. Now again, you can have a community with your own writers group. So it's really understanding, and I think the boot camp experience where everybody's in the same boat and has to be accountable to the weekly deadlines, that's preparing you for staffing season. So if you can't write a TV spec or a TV pilot in 5 weeks, then you're not ready to be staffed. So it really is helping them mentally, emotionally, as well as prepare technically to be able to get their career going.
Yeah, and like she was saying, that even if you don't get accepted into a fellowship, there are so many consultants like Jen out there that work also with feature writers. I mean, you work with feature writers.
Oh,
yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So this isn't only a TV thing, but
Yeah.
if you, let's say you are submitting to contests and maybe you're hitting like the first round of, of acceptance, maybe you hit a couple quarterfinals, you're not winning at anything. Something is off.
Right.
You're doing a lot of things right, but something is just not quite clicking. So you have to educate yourself. It's like anything else, and there are free ways to do it. You can read as many books as you want. You can give, to your friends and have them give you notes on it. But the reasons the consultants are out there is because they know more than you do.
Well, and
Right.
it's fascinating. I mean, I think that I always look at it. When I first started my business, CAA brought me in and we brainstormed for like an hour and a half that was all about what is this business going to be? What does it look like? How does it differ from a manager or an agent? And it was, a simple recognition with consultants is we all have different worldviews. We all have different backgrounds. Like my background is the studio executive background. So through understanding the studio executive background on what we look for story that sells, then it gives the writer a broader perspective on how to write a strong story. So I look at all the consultants, there's a group of incredibly strong consultants. Many of them are with my publishing company, Michael Weezy Productions. And I look at the variety of backgrounds and I look at the voice that's coming out and it blows my mind. I mean, we're all always learning about story. So it's really, but through the consultants, we're trained to pass it forward and to help you implement it into your writing so that you can get the outcome that will lead to a sale.
And actually, this isn't on my list of questions, so hopefully I'm not throwing Jen off for a loop here. But since we said that a couple times,
Right.
The story that sells, and it's kind of that's also like voice. It's like how do you really define what a story is that sells? And everybody is different. I mean, through our development program with the ISA, we rep some writers not on a legal basis, but just on a developmental basis, and I submit to them. Submit their projects around town, and I've helped a few writers get options and things. And there was one particular project that was still very early in the developmental process. The writing was okay, but it needed a lot of work. But the idea was so amazing. And so I still sent it to someone that I trusted at a production company, and they ended up optioning it for a lot of money. And so there's still something to say in a great idea and the timing. But it's still so important to make sure that that story is there. And it was on a conceptual level, he just hadn't developed it. So tell us what, the industry in general, maybe even just, the upper mainstream executives, what are they looking for in terms of the story that sells?
Well, you can look at it and you can say, like every year, I always tell people, like, be your own research person, be your own, like you control what happens in your career. So a great way to look at what is a great idea for a pilot. I've actually had 39 clients sell pilots, and I've had 5 go to series, and it's fascinating to go, what's going to hit? And what I can tell you about Hollywood is like when we have pilot season, which we're in the midst of right now, like we can sit there and say what we think is the strongest story, what we think will be a hit. But very often, like for example, when I was at CBS Paramount, I covered NCIS. Like I don't know that we knew that it was going to be the massive hit that it is, and that was Middle America. It wasn't New York and LA and being like the sexiest, hottest show there. It was Middle America. So it's really, I think the biggest thing you can do to find concepts that work is, number one, know your emotional truth and know what you want to say with the story. I think number two, it's finding stories where there's a built-in audience. Like, for example, when you look at The Good Wife, there was a built-in audience. I mean, we had seen what had happened on the news with Elliot Spitzer and John Edwards, and then after with Tiger Woods and all that. Like, we all had a curiosity about what is it to be the woman that is in the aftermath of a scandal that their husband created. And that immediate audience made us want to see what that concept was. And same with Homeland. You look at a prisoner of war who was gone for 8 years. And not only do you have this massive engine of story and what happened during those 8 years, but you also have you know, the whole idea of, you know, we know in the news, prisoner of wars that have come home. We clung to those stories. We wanted to know. We wanted to hear what the story was and what happened. And so there was an immediate built-in audience. So I always tell people, like, really pay attention to the news and take elements. Like, I remember one time I read like a Time magazine article on a female general who made a bad call, and it wound up with kids being killed. And I remember reading it and just going, oh my gosh, like, this so goes against the feminine nature. So to imagine what life looks like after something like that choice happens, that intrigues me. Like, I'm all about, like, give me an angle that I don't know to go into your story, and that goes through the wound of your central character. You know, when we look at Claire Danes and Homeland and Don Draper and Mad Men and Alicia and The Good Wife, like, you look at these characters and you're like, they're taking us into this story through this very powerful worldview that comes through the wound of their own experience.
There's a relatability. Mm-hmm. Like, even if you look at some of the quirky shows like a Workaholics or something, you can still somehow relate to those crazy guys. It's just all in an exaggerated form. And so, I mean, I would have loved to have been in the room when they were pitching that, because I don't know how there's a lot of voice there, because these guys are just so wacky and wild, and it has to kind of come out through some of the dialogue. But then also, if you look at something like Sleepy Hollow, we all know the story of Sleepy Hollow, and then we all could just kind of consider what it would be like if we woke up 300 years later, and then you have to deal with that world. So there's a relatability there, and it has nothing to do with the story.
It doesn't, and it's also like, say, for example, how many people have seen Mr. Robot? Okay, so like Mr. Robot's probably one of the strongest pilots in the last several years. So in looking at that, like, and again, we understood the why. We understood why he wanted what he wanted, and it had to do with the feeling that Evil Corp killed his father. So that is something that we feel from the very beginning of that story, and feel throughout the series, and the character is just written so incredibly well. So it's like you really want to study what is working, why is it working, how can I mimic it in the stories that I tell.
And I think that's a good reminder that when you guys are pitching a story to someone, or if you're writing a log line down, don't pitch concept. Concept may get a few viewers. Like Sleepy Hollow got me to watch the pilot because I'm like, cool, I like Sleepy Hollow. I knew nothing about the story.
Right.
But then the reason I kept watching was because of the relationships in the story. So if you were to first pitch character and that want and need and personal motivation and everything, and then go, but then it's in this world of Evil Corp, etc., then the person listening would be like, oh, interesting, okay. Because there's still that universal thought of, oh, this guy's dad was murdered or something.
Yes.
But then you build the world around that, as opposed to world first and then the guy living in it.
Okay, so I think, like, I always say, like, what you want to think about, like, when I look at The Good Wife, and I think, and this, to me, I think it was one of the best pilots done, too. I also love Luther. If you haven't seen Luther on the BBC, I think that is by far one of the best pilots done as well. And when you look at The Good Wife and you think, okay, you have a legal show, but we're not going back to watch what the cases are every week. We're going back because we're intrigued by the internal story. And the story between Alicia's husband committed a sex scandal. He goes to jail. So the trigger is she loses her breadwinner. She has to bring security back to her family. And then we find out that her law school sweetheart gives her a job. So immediately you have this triangle because of this situation, and the question becomes for season 1, will Alicia fall in the arms of her law school sweetheart because of what her husband did to her? Like, you can look at that and you go, that brings us into the legal world, because we all understand what it is to go through these types of scenarios in our love life.
And you're asking the same questions if you're writing a movie too, because you want multiple layers there.
Yeah.
All right, so last little topic here. We have about 2 or 3 minutes. some manageable expectations for a writer to have as far as the pursuit to be working as a working writer.
Yes.
How, you know, it's one thing to dream, and I hope you continue doing that. But then there's also like, okay, there's a practical way of achieving this.
How many of you in this room believe that you have the talent to be a working writer? Okay, I love this. That's the number one thing. Belief is the number one thing that will make a difference in your journey. Because if you don't believe it, nobody else does. So I think manageable expectations. I have seen writing careers that take 7 to 10 years to begin, and then when they go, they completely go. So I am definitely a believer that it is a journey. And don't be so attached to the destination, because the journey is where the gift is.
There isn't really a destination.
Right.
Because it's always just continuing.
Always.
You're always just going to be working. Yeah.
Like the writers that I have helped launch their careers, and I'm very close with my writers, so I hear about it afterwards, and you think that, oh my God, once I get my first show, then it's made. No, that's when the work begins, and
It's
then
not easy to get the second show.
No, it is not easy to. I mean, I think the whole longevity thing comes from being comfortable in your voice, recognizing the journey, recognizing you're going to have, and I'm going to say you're going to have your on moments, you're going to have your off moments. It's just what the writing journey is. Like, you know, I look at here and going to the films that I was able to go to and seeing the filmmakers in the room and recognizing, wow, they're at this pinnacle that most writers dream of. Does it mean that their career is made? It doesn't. It means it's an incredible moment to celebrate, and it's a triumph, but you have to continue the work in order to create the process and the longevity and a successful writing career. And some people, like I'll never forget Elizabeth Gilbert's, I don't know if it was a TED Talk or just a talk, that was all on the idea of eat, pray, love, and what if this was her only hit? And what if there was never a book that was she was never going to write a book that matched that, and really coming to terms with that. Like, it's okay. Like, if you hit these pinnacles, celebrate them and be in them, but constantly recognize you have to go back to doing the emotional work to create a successful writing career.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you were to ask any celebrity, whether they're a writer, director, actor, whoever, if they've arrived, I bet 99% of them would say, I don't even know what that means. No, because they're constantly working. So there's no arrival anywhere.
Right.
And how many live in Los Angeles? You see so many people driving these cars when they make about $60,000 a year, and the car is worth more than what they make on their salary. It means nothing.
Right.
There's no arrival.
Yeah.
But a lot of times when you're starting out in the industry, you think that you're going to hit a particular plateau and go, bam, this is now me. When you could just say that now.
Yeah.
This is me now, so now I'm going to be me. You know?
And I think, like, I definitely think the writer's journey is definitely the coming into voice, which is what this is all about, in the constantly nurturing of that voice. And you nurture your voice by living your life. And, I see writers that will get stuck in a room and will go from master's degree or have 3 degrees and then go into the writer's room. I'm going to tell you, like, my favorite writers when I was staffing shows were the writers that went out, did another career, failed, succeeded, failed, knew what it was to fall and get back up, and then came and had something to say.
Yeah. Okay, so Craig, you're saying we do have some time for a couple questions? I think we might have time for about 2 or 3 here. So, anybody have any questions? Yeah. Can we turn the heat up? It is a little cold in here. We'll figure it out.
Yeah.
And just as a reminder, we have our keynote speaker at 11:15, right? At 11:15, Jim Hart. He's amazing. Hi, Jim. Jim, we'll do a full introduction for you, Jim. But so stick around. He's going to be great. Any other questions? Yeah. What do you recommend as for networking?
Yeah, like how to, talk about the writer?
That's a good question, yeah. Because a lot of times, especially if you're trying to reach people of a higher A-list level, it's very easy to come across as a little cuckoo.
Yeah. It's all about creating a relationship. So I think what you have to know, like I tell writers, so you want to go to panels and events like this. You want to meet people. You want to nurture relationships. Certainly, joining organizations like the ISA, it creates community. It's constant events. You want to, when you do meet people, a way to think about nurturing relationships. Like it's interesting because I have a high-level executive friend who said, I don't like it when I meet with a writer and the next day they send me a friend request on Facebook because my Facebook is personal to me. But they said, but LinkedIn, I don't mind because that's business. So, and it was fascinating to me because I'm all about, I don't mind who's on my Facebook page. I'm all about the more the merrier. But I understand that some executives feel like my family's on my Facebook page, and I really like. So one thing I do recommend, like if you go to a panel, I always tell people, like ask a question, and then ask a question. You'll have an opportunity to do that, and then the next day or within the week, send a LinkedIn request. Tell them how much you enjoyed what they had to say. Nobody gets tired of being stroked in this business. So tell them what you enjoyed about what they said, and then create a relationship. Like you're saying, I really identified with this one thing that you said because this is something that happened in my own life. You create a relationship. I actually have a client who the other day met with Sarah Treen, simply because Sarah Treen is doing The Affair and has done countless unbelievable projects. She is a playwright and a brilliant writer. And my client found out that they went to the same college. So she went on LinkedIn and she read everything she could get her hands on that Sarah wrote. She had comments for her on what she loved about her writing. And this relationship went on for like over a year. And then she met with her for like an hour and brought her into the writer's room on The Affair. And I'm like, none of that would have happened unless she did what she needed to do to create the relationship. And it's all there. Because every writer started where you guys are. They started with a dream.
I think it's important to manage your eagerness too.
Yeah.
Because a lot of times I've seen people, act in a way as if this person that they would like to meet, this is their only chance and they're never going to meet someone like that again, or they're not going to be able to reach out, and then they approach that person that way, and the person is going to realize that immediately.
Yeah.
And they'll be like, oh, okay, and then they're going to back off. So instead, this is all just a numbers game, this industry. The more people you meet, the more opportunities and chances that you'll have, and eventually one of those people will end up being someone who will and can help you, and then you'll be able to do the same thing for somebody else. So just patience and just lessen that eagerness, because it isn't do or die. We kind of feel like it is sometimes.
People want to work with people they like, number one. So recognize, like, people want you. Number one, they want every meeting that you go in. People want you to succeed. Like we
want to say yes.
Exactly. Like tell us why we should say yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It is.
Another question. Yeah.
When you're looking for a threshold of writers that you're willing to help, because I'm sure it's something very selective about people that you're willing to help. What are you looking for before you take somebody on?
What are you looking for in a client before you take him or her on?
For me, desire is a big thing. Like knowing that I always ask questions like, what is your body of work? Where are you at right now? I usually, like, if a lot of times I will do, a lot of times people will contact me and they know exactly what they want. So, and so that helps. I also have a half-hour free consult if you don't know what you want. And during that consult, that's kind of when I do, what you have to say, like what has happened in your life. And what I'm trying to do is find out how big is your well to write. And really that's what I look for. I honestly just look for a desire and a passion to write. And I'm interested, I work with writers coming out of college to co-executive producer level because I staffed over 15 shows. So I have a lot of working writers who will come to me because I staff them and they know my process and they've received notes from me, so they know what that experience is. But I think the newer writers, I love discovering new voices. There's nothing I love more than this, and so it's all about finding someone who's passionate.
And it's also like a willingness to listen, because sometimes when you work with a writer who just is unwilling to budge on anything, just go away. You need to figure something out on your own in here because there's something else going on that I can't help you with. But then it's also nice to, like, there's a female writer that I've consulted for a while, and 90% of the time she'll be more than happy to take the notes. But then every once in a while she'll say, no, I'm keeping that.
And that's okay.
Great, yeah, like that, I can respect that.
Yeah.
Because I don't expect a writer to take every single note.
Nope.
I don't want them to, really. I want them to start thinking on their own.
But I think hearing and taking a note, like
Right.
I think it is so important. I'm going to tell you in the staffing process and as a current executive, like when we would have writers be very defensive on the phone calls with the network, like I would have to have a conversation and say, you have to hear the note. When you jump to defend it, you're not hearing it.
Defend it later if
Yeah.
you really feel like you need to defend it.
Yep, I totally agree.
Other questions? There was, yeah.
So I find that before submitting any work for consideration to be rec or anything like that you should really go through a process of like finalizing and polishing the script. And I'm just wondering what you recommend for that polishing process.
Yeah.
How do you know when you're ready?
How do we know when you're ready? That's a whole other panel.
Well, first of all, development in scripts could go on forever. So you have to recognize that. I think I think that's where your intuition and your gut has to know when the story is the best that it can be within your capability. And I think through the polishing process, certainly going to consultants, going to friends. The hard thing about friends is you're not getting an objective point of view, but you're still getting a strong point of view. So I tell people, like, you want as many people to read it as possible. I've seen so many people lately, which I think it's a good idea. Like, they'll go on Facebook or LinkedIn and they'll say, hey guys, I have a script done. Does anybody want to read it? I'll do the same for you. And then suddenly you're getting all this feedback. So I think that there are ways to do that. And then I think it's just trusting the story, knowing that you've done the work. I think the biggest mistake writers make is they submit the work before it's ready. And I'm going to tell you, a lot of films get made before the story was ready. So a lot of TV gets made before the story was ready. So I think we're all learning.
Well, and the importance of having multiple people read the script is so that you'll start seeing if the same type of note is coming about the same element of the script, it's not ready because multiple people are noticing the same issue. So then you can correct that issue, and then then you can send it to a few other people, and then we'll see what other notes. Eventually, you have to stop doing that because you can just do that for the rest of your life because everybody's gonna have an opinion. Even when the movie is on screen, you're sitting in the theater, somebody's gonna tell you should have done it that way.
Yeah.
But there's like a level of comfort that you'll eventually have in your writing, but then there's also that note-taking process of if you keep getting the same note, obviously something's not working. Screenplay contests can be a great way to gauge whether something's ready too. If you're hitting quarterfinalists over and over and over again, you're doing something right, but you're not quite hitting yet. If you start winning some smaller contests,
Now here's what I have to say this about screenwriting contests.
Yeah.
I definitely am a believer. Like, I have had clients who have turned in top-notch scripts. One, I remember a client whose pilot actually ended up getting made, and it didn't make it to the top tier of the competitions. So I am a believer that none of it, no one's God. All of your story is based on what is our background, what are our wounds, and how do we connect with your story. So I believe that the competitions are great. I think they give you exposure to networking and relationships. I don't think they're the end-all be-all. I don't think if your script doesn't hit the top tier, then it definitively means that your writing doesn't deserve to be at the top tier. So I think it's an opinion.
Yeah, and there are so many contests out there, and as new writers or young writers, I don't necessarily mean by age, but someone who's still early in that development process, it's smarter to apply and submit to some of the smaller screenplay contests as opposed to going with your first script right to nickel, not making the first round, and suddenly going, well, it's not good enough.
Yep.
It's not true. There's like 9,000 people. It's almost like the lottery with the nickel. Because those 10 or 5 finalists, there were probably 25 other scripts that anybody could have said it was better than the others.
And I always recommend reading. Like when you see who the winners are, if the scripts are available, read them.
Yeah.
And you may find out, no, I don't necessarily agree that this is stronger than mine, but learn from it. What worked in that?
And the Academy is going to be picking different scripts than another contest. Like if you're writing a horror movie, it's likely the Academy isn't going to be selecting it for the top 5 of nickel. But that's just because it's them. Anyway, go ahead. You had a question.
Jen,
Hello.
I was wondering, do you prefer consulting writers for film or for television? And if you have a preference, why?
Jen's preference of writers to consult.
I like anyone who has a strong voice. So I can definitely say, the feature script is a lot more work. There's no denying that. I love pilots. I love the TV world. However, I think finding a voice in the feature world that hits it out of the ballpark, there's no better experience. And I have a love for features every bit as much as TV. My contact base is in TV. So that's where I'm able to really take writers to a different level. Many of the feature writers that I work with, I get to write TV because I think there's more opportunity in television. Unless you're an entrepreneur. Like if you're an entrepreneur who's going to go out and raise the money to get your film made, then great. Then I say, great thing for writers to do if they go that route is go out, get your film in a festival, festivals, see what happens. Because then coming into the TV world, when you have heat in the feature world, makes it easier to enter the TV world. But I don't have a preference. I love strong story. Yeah, thank you for asking.
Other questions? Oh yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so for everybody who's here, I'm going to, if you go to my website, and it's jengrisanti.com, so it's www.jengrisanti.com, and you look under blog. There's a link there. It says for the people who are at the ISA Sundance talk. If you press that link, you're going to get my free ebook, How to Write a TV Pilot That Sells. And you're also going to get a $100 gift certificate toward any consulting that you want to do with me in the future. So if you are interested in consulting, then I have a gift certificate that is available to you. And I want to thank everybody for showing up. I want to thank Max for his tremendous interview.
This was great.
Craig, yeah.
And we've got a whole day ahead of us here,
Yeah.
so I hope you guys stick around. And also, just as a little slight announcement, we have some really cool things happening with the ISA in the coming months. Our development program is still kind of in like the quote-unquote beta version. We launched it, Felicity is, I don't see her here, but she and I launched it last year with the help of Craig, and we helped 5 different writers get options, and then another writer get rep with an agent, and that was while we were planning all this. So we're going to be able to put some more time into it in the coming years. So guys, just, stay tuned. The development program will have a lot of other things going on in terms of news and announcements. Jim, did you have a question?
First of all, Jen's giving you incredible insights, even me. So
Thank you,
Great.
Jim. I can't wait to see you. Thank you.
I just want to say something about the blacklist.
The
We
blacklist.
didn't have, when I started out at Sundance in 1992, we didn't have the blacklist. And the blacklist, my daughter's film got made because of the blacklist. She just directed her first feature.
Great.
because of the blacklist. So we didn't have access to the blacklist. And it's safe. Franklin's done an incredible thing to give you a portal to share your work. You may agree or not agree, and you get coverage. You get, you can see
I agree.
reactions to your work. And I wish we'd had the blacklist when
Yeah, I think the feature part of it is very, very honed well. I think the TV is new and it's coming into its own. I have a close friend of mine, her script made the blacklist, and it got made Hope Springs with Tommy Lee Jones and Meryl Streep. So yeah, I definitely believe in everything Franklin's doing. I'm glad you mentioned that.
And there are so many outlets too, though. I mean, Blacklist is just, one of them that's at the top of the list, quote unquote. That there's just so many ways to just get feedback at either a low price or for free. Blacklist has been around for a long time, and a while ago it was kind of like this secret little thing where it was just industry related, and the managers and the reps around town would list and rank the best scripts that were probably never going to be made. So it was actually a little bit of a curse to be on the blacklist at first, but it was also a calling card. I know a lot of writers who ended up on the blacklist before the blacklist .com thing began. And they had their scripts on the blacklist, and they were like, well, okay, this is probably not going to be made, but it got them work after that. And so the blacklist is kind of doing that in terms of trying to allow more people to have access to that. And the industry is changing. There's a lot more opportunities for writers than when Jim began.
I was on the other blacklist.
You were on the other blacklist.
Do not read.
Yeah, the do not read blacklist. Yeah, go ahead.
I was curious, are there writers that write primarily just for pilots?
Are there
Yes.
writers that write just pilots? Definitely.
Yeah, there are, like they always say, like, what type of writer are you? And a lot of writers will say, I don't want a staff, I don't want to be on a staff, so I don't want to go through that whole process. Now, what you have to recognize with being a pilot writer is it's like the studio is investing millions of dollars in you. So staffing gives credibility to that. However, if the voice is crystal clear and you come up with strong concept, there are many writers who have never staffed and just developed TV pilots.
All right, guys. Thank you so
All
much.
right.
Thanks to Jen.
Thank you to ISA. Yeah.